By the account of the men who later studied them, the North Vietnamese had a rule for the Cobra. When the snake came, you did not shoot. You did not fire your rifle. You did not touch the heavy machine gun. You pressed yourself flat into the bottom of the trench, and you waited, and you prayed it was hunting someone else, because a single tracer round would tell the pilot exactly where you were, and the pilot was a few hundred feet above you, moving at 170 miles an hour, carrying enough rockets to turn 40 feet of earth into a smoking hole. On the nights of June 5th through 7th, 1969, 2 regiments of the North Vietnamese Army forgot that rule. They came out of the tree line at a single American company holding a firebase called Crook. 400 of them died in the wire and the open ground around it. 1 American died. This is the story of how a helicopter taught a disciplined army to be afraid of its own muzzle flash. To understand Crook, you have to understand what the Cobra had already become by the middle of 1969. The American firebase was a simple, brutal idea. Drop a rifle company and a battery of guns onto a patch of cleared jungle, sit it directly on top of an enemy supply route, and dare him to do something about it. The problem was the dare. When the North Vietnamese came, they came in the dark, in numbers, and they came fast. Sappers through the wire, human waves behind them, all of it inside the distance where a firebase's own artillery became dangerous to its own men. You could break the first rank with howitzers fired level into the charge. You could not chase the heavy machine gun crew working the tree line. You could not hunt the rocket teams crawling the perimeter in the black. That was the gap the Cobra filled. In April of 1969, at a patrol base called Diamond 3, the North Vietnamese learned what that meant. The first enemy rounds hit at 3 in the morning. Within seconds, the alert crews of Bravo Company, 25th Aviation Battalion, the Diamond Heads, were sprinting for their aircraft. They flew up into a ceiling of low cloud, lit from below by flares, dropped into the cauldron, and worked the attacking infantry right to the edge of the wire. Then they did the thing the enemy would come to dread. They turned on the heavy machine gun positions that had been trying to knock them down. The guns that fired at the Diamond Heads did not fire for long. The aircraft doing that work was the Bell AH-1 Cobra. The men called it the Snake. It was the first machine ever built from a blank sheet to do one thing: kill from the air in close support of the men on the ground. Bell took the proven engine, transmission, and rotor of the Huey and bolted them to a brand new fuselage barely 3 feet wide, a knife seen head-on, a fraction of the target a Huey gave a gunner lying in the grass. 2 men rode in tandem behind armor, the gunner up front, the pilot behind and above him. Up front, in a chin turret, sat a 7.62 millimeter minigun and a 40 millimeter grenade launcher. The minigun did not fire in bursts you could count. It fired 4,000 rounds a minute, a solid rope of metal, a sound the men described not as gunfire, but as a buzzsaw tearing through sheet metal. Under the stub wings rode the rockets, 2.75-inch folding fin rockets, as many as 76 of them, each warhead throwing killing fragments across a circle 45 feet wide. Here is the part that mattered most. The pilot did not aim those rockets with a sight on a gun. He aimed them with the entire helicopter. To put a salvo on a target, he flew the whole aircraft at it, a hard rolling dive, the nose dropping, the airframe screaming toward 220 miles an hour, then a snap pull-out, a heartbeat before the dive could tear the rotor off. Fast in, fast out. On the target before the man on the target understood he had been seen. The Cobra reached Vietnam in the late summer of 1967. Within days, it had killed for the first time. By the spring of 1969, the Diamond Heads were flying it across Tay Ninh province, and the crews had learned to lay fire 15 meters from friendly troops in total darkness. One Diamond Head pilot, Robert Spittler, once flew his ship to point-blank range to break up an attack on a stranded convoy, hovering in the open, taking fire, and answering with everything aboard. He described the tactic plainly afterward. "You just hover off the ground," he said, "and fire with everything you have." For that, he was awarded the Distinguished Flying Cross. That was the machine, and those were the men that the 9th North Vietnamese Division was about to run into at a place called Crook. Fire support, Base Crook, sat 8.5 miles northwest of Tay Ninh City, hard against the routes running out of Cambodia. It had been built that April for exactly one purpose: to cramp the enemy's movement. and it was small. One rifle company, Bravo of the 3rd Battalion, 22nd Infantry, one artillery battery, A Battery, 7th Battalion, 11th Artillery, a platoon of heavy mortars, a few hundred men all told. Against them, the North Vietnamese sent 2 regiments, and then a 3rd. The Americans knew they were coming. Sensors seated around the base and radar on the observation tower caught heavy movement in the tree line on the night of June 4th. Artillery fired into the dark. Things went quiet. At 3 in the morning on June 5th, the quiet ended. Rockets and mortars came down on the base in a wall of noise and flying dirt. Then the 272nd Regiment came out of the tree line from the south and the east, with the 271st behind it, surging forward under the cover of their own machine guns. 16 of them made it through the outer wire. Claymores and rifle fire killed every one. Inside the perimeter, A Battery dropped its howitzer tubes level and fired 105mm shells straight into the charge. 76 men of that assault died in front of those guns on the first night alone, and above it all, the gunships came on station. Spooky and Shadow, the fixed-wing gun platforms, poured fire down through the dark, and the Cobras worked the seam the artillery could not reach, the moving targets in the tree line, and the open ground between it and the wire. By the documented method of the Diamond Head crews, a gun run on a firebase under assault was a thing of violent precision. The Snake would roll in out of the black, the pilot flying the whole airframe down the line of a muzzle flash, and a salvo of rockets would walk across the ground where that flash had been. 45 feet of killing fragments for every warhead. A position that had been firing a moment before would simply go quiet. Inside the wire, one man held the whole thing together. Major Joseph Haysha, the battalion executive officer, moved between the berm and the tower through the incoming fire, finding targets and calling the supporting rounds down precisely where they had to land. Overhead, Major John Bode flew his Bronco spotter plane straight into the teeth of it to mark targets for the Phantom jets. And on every pass, his little aircraft was ringed with red tracer climbing up at him from 6 heavy machine gun positions on the ground. 6 positions, firing into the sky. Every one of them had just told the gunships exactly where it was. When the first night ended, 77 enemy dead lay outside the wire. For the North Vietnamese, that was the good night. The second night, the 88th Regiment took its turn. Roughly 430 men came at Crook from the northeast and the northwest. Same plan, same wire, the same guns waiting in the dark. This time, when it was over, 323 of them lay dead in the open. 10 more were taken prisoner. The bunker line was never broken, not once, across any of it. When the sweeps finished and the bodies were counted, the number around Fire Support Base Crook reached 400. 400 of the enemy, 1 American killed, a handful wounded. It was one of the most lopsided victories of the entire war. On June 13th, General Creighton Abrams handed presidential unit citations to 5 battalions of the 25th Division. The battalion's own pride was simpler than any citation. They spoke of the men of Bravo Company, who turned back 2 North Vietnamese regiments in 2 nights. Now think about what all of that meant for a man lying in that tree line. To fight back, to fire your rifle, to work your machine gun, was to send up a tracer. And the tracer was a finger pointing at your own chest, visible to a pilot 1,000 meters away who could be on top of you in seconds. The geometry was merciless. The men who fired were the men the Cobras found. The men who lived were the men who lay still and did nothing while their friends died around them. That is not a story told only by the men who flew. A published study of the Cobra's war records the conclusion the enemy reached on his own, that the aircraft was so effective the North Vietnamese often avoided shooting at it altogether, fearing massive and instant retribution. It became, in practice, fire discipline written in blood. Across the war, well-hidden North Vietnamese and Viet Cong gunners learned to hold their fire as the gunships passed, because the muzzle flash that gave them a shot also gave away the position they would die in. They tried to beat it. They set their heavy machine guns in triangles of 3, overlapping fields of fire, built to bring a helicopter down. And the Americans answered with cold arithmetic. A small, slow scout helicopter, flown low as live bait, with Cobras stacked above it, waiting for a single gun to reveal itself so they could fall on it. But the snake was never invulnerable, and the men who flew it never pretended otherwise. In a straight dive, the Cobra was a predictable target on a predictable line, and the tree line shot back. Of the roughly 824 of these aircraft sent to Vietnam, more than 300 were lost. 235 pilots and 12 crewmen never came home. It was the most dangerous thing in that sky.
It was not a safe place to sit.
What the survivors remember is the sound. The fast, flat approach over the trees. The rotor. Then the buzzsaw, that long, tearing note of the minigun that meant the men in the wire would live until morning. And then, sometimes, nothing. A tree line gone silent. An enemy who had made the only intelligent decision left to him, which was to do absolutely nothing at all. The Cobra went home from that war, and its bloodline never ended. The machine that flew over Crook is the direct ancestor of the Apache flying today. But the truest measure of what it was sits in that silence around the Firebase on the morning of June 7th, 1969. 400 men had come out of the dark to take Crook. The ones who fired were found. The ones who lived had learned the rule, that against this machine, the bravest thing a soldier could do, and very often the only thing that kept him breathing, was to hold his fire and disappear. A helicopter had taught an army to be afraid of its own muzzle flash.